Again, how are you, friends? Having a good time in Update Conference? This is an awesome conference and such a lovely city. I'm so proud and honored and humbled to be here. I just love Prague. I didn't know that, but I love Prague now. My name is Rodrigo Diaz. I'm a Microsoft Regional Director from Microsoft. And I don't work for Microsoft. Actually, us regional directors, we are not directors of anything. We are not regional at all. But Microsoft consider us like some kind of advisors and in our own countries. And I'm from Mexico. I live in Mexico City, one of the most crowded cities in the world. I'm also a Microsoft MVP since 10 years ago. Actually, I'm currently in the developer technologies category. And today I'm going to talk about lifting and shifting legacy web services and actually legacy web applications into Azure Service Fabric. Is anyone using Service Fabric already here in your projects? 2 people. I want to speak with you after the talk because Azure Service Fabric is such an incredible and fantastic technology, but it's not very used, at least in my optics. And I want to speak with you so we can share some optics around it. So it's fascinating, the history. Let me switch here. Well, this is the agenda. I'm going to speak about why we should do this and lift and shift technologies and what is Service Fabric. And I'm going to speak about a lot of different things. So the first thing that I want to talk about is why. And it's fascinating, the history of the different development technologies. Actually, Turbo C++ was my first language that I used when I was very, very young. Actually, I was almost a young man. And after that, maybe someone of you remember this, IDE. It was incredible to play Gorillas. Do you remember this? And after so many different technologies and languages, we landed in the UI kind of languages, for example, Visual Basic. I remember that Visual Basic was 2 diskettes, 2 3.5 inches diskettes. I don't know if you remember that. Maybe I'm too old right now. But it was fascinating. If we see and think about the different technologies and the landscape and the story of .NET development, we can think back and remember that in 2002, .NET framework was released, and there was this new C# language. It was pretty disruptive. And after that, maybe in 2005, Microsoft released .NET Framework 3.0 with Windows Presentation Foundation, Windows Workflow Foundation, Windows Communication Foundation, and Card Space. Silverlight was released in 2000, I think 2007 or something like that. And in 2016, there is this announcement from Microsoft that says that this new technology called Azure Service Fabric is in general availability. Azure Service Fabric is such an important technology inside Microsoft, and I'm going to talk more about it in the next few slides. And in this year, Microsoft announced the support for Windows containers in Azure Service Fabric. So it's a 16 years story right here in a couple of seconds, in a couple of minutes. Sadly, if you see the project's landscape and the current, maybe in your own companies or in your own customers, there are a lot of things that are very old style architected, and they are using lots of legacy software and architectures. For example, in one of the projects I'm involved with in Mexico, there is this project, this is a true story. There is this solution with almost like 600 or 500 projects, and each project is a web service. It's an ASMX, those kind of web services. Do you remember those SOAP services? So 500 or 600 SOAP services in a single solution. But it's funny because those projects compile in one single DLL file. So it's just a library that maybe is a 30 megs library that this company, when they compiled up the project, the whole solution, they copy the DLL into a virtual directory in IIS manually, and that's it. It's a retail company. This is a true story. I don't want to speak about which company is it, but it's a true story. This retail company, multi-million dollars company, is doing that right now. No DevOps, no clustering, nothing, no microservices, no new architecture at all. So sadly, after millions of lines of code and so many years of .NET history, we still have to deal with this kind of platform, IIS. Has anyone know how to configure IIS correctly? I don't know anyone who does. One person. Come to Mexico, I will pay you a lot of money because it's so difficult to understand IIS. It's like magic, right? So, at least in my perspective, and the only person I know that it really knows about IIS is the program manager of the IIS project in Microsoft. So, yeah, it's funny. Okay, so there is this disruption when the cloud came over, maybe 10 years ago, 12 years ago. Azure was announced at PDC 2008, I think, in Los Angeles. And a lot of different architectures and application models were born with the cloud. Of course, there are millions and millions of different lines of codes and applications that are already built with different architectures and different styles. No cloud, no nothing, no microservices, no disruptive design there. So there is this path, or there is this journey, as the journey to the cloud that we can see here, that says that the first thing that we want to try, or the first step to the cloud, will be to rehost our applications, to lift and shift our applications, maybe in a modern environment, maybe in a modern runtime, for example, virtual machines. This company that I'm talking about, this retail company, has their own data center. And of course, they are spending millions of pesos, Mexican pesos, in hardware. And it's a good idea to think about not spending lots of money in hardware, but use cloud computing concerns. So this is the first thing I'm going to do right here after I talk about this continuum. The whole journey is, the first step is to lift and shift to a virtualized environment. After that, we want to modernize our application somehow. And that somehow is going to be in this session with Service Fabric. So Let me show you some things that I prepared already. There are so many things that I need to talk about because there are so many moving parts here. So I created this application that is very, very famous. Maybe you have heard about Northwind Traders. Northwind Traders is the old demo from Microsoft, right? Let me just run this. It's just a simple ASP.NET Web Forms application. I'm using some web services built with ASMX technologies. It's an ugly application, as you can see. It's just a data grid with data, and if you select a client, oh, I'm sorry about that. I'm sorry about that, okay? So it's just an ugly application, very old style, built with ASP.NET, nothing fancy here. We can see that this is a, let me show you, .NET Framework 4.5 website. And I have the services right here. It's .NET Framework 4.5. At least I separated the data access layer here. As you can see, nothing fancy at all. Okay, so this is the kind of applications that this company that I'm trying to expose right here, or trying to understand right here, is the kind of application and the kind of architecture that most companies use today, at least in Latin America. I don't know here in Czech Republic, but this is maybe the 80% of the companies. 80% of the companies are like this. Nothing fancy at all, not using any kind of disruptive architecture or nothing at all. Okay, so the first thing that you want to do, if we go back to the journey to the cloud topic, is to virtualize, but you don't want to spend a lot of time and money to run your applications in a modern runtime. So this is where IaaS, Infrastructure as a Service, IaaS, comes to the rescue. So how we can take this kind of applications to the cloud very easily? Well, there is this option here. In Visual Studio, we can do it in so many different things. There is this Azure migration tool directly from Microsoft that you can use it to move your applications to virtual machines in the cloud. But I'm going to choose one of the options right here. There is the, I can't remember right now. I'm like blocked. What's that? No. Actually, I did it before. Let me show you, because it was, when you deploy the virtual machine, and it takes so long, so I did it already. So it's right here. Just let me, bear with me right now. So there is this Northwind virtual machine right now, right here, that is running. This is running the SQL database, and I have another virtual machine that is running the IaaS one. Let me show you. I'm sorry about that. This is the other one. I can't remember. Okay. So, yes, this is the one that I wanted to show you, Update Conference 2018 BM. So, if I go here and I type default ASPX, so here's the same page, customers ASPX, and here's the application running. I'm a little bit confused because everything that I did with the whole Azure components, every single name has update conference 2018, so I'm a little bit confused. I'm sorry about that. So, okay, this is the first step. Let me extend this and present. Okay, so the next step in that journey cloud that I was talking about is about containerization. This is using Docker to containerize. I don't know if that's a real verb in English. Containerize your application and create an image locally in your machine, and that image push it to a registry, maybe Docker Hub, or maybe Azure Container Registry. After that, you want to maybe put that image and run it in an orchestrator like Azure Service Fabric that I'm going to show you right now. So, containerization, very easy stuff. Okay, it's duplicated. So, Docker. Docker is this technology that allows you to download and push images, allows you to virtualize the whole operating system rather than virtualize everything like a virtual machine. So I want to show you a couple of things. For example, if I want to containerize this application, Northwind Traders, right here. In Docker, it's very important to have this Docker file. It's like a recipe that you want to create in order to containerize the application that you want to move along in different runtimes environments. So I can do this and type from, I don't know, maybe Microsoft, IES, latest, then say copy everything in the root of that particular image, and that's it. And I can build this image using Docker build. This is not a compelling Docker, of course, Docker talk. I just want you to see that is the only thing that you need to create is this Docker file. It's like a recipe, and you use the Docker file in order to create the image. I created the image right here. I can type Docker images in order to see what other images I have right now, and you can tag the image so you can detect which one is the one you want, and then push it over to a registry with Docker push, the name of the image, and that's it. So Docker 101 in a couple of minutes. I don't want to spend much time here. Let's go forward, because I want to speak about microservices. Microservices is a kind of architecture, it's a kind of pattern that says that you must separate the things in your application, in your backend, decouple your backend in order to have better maintainability and better life cycle of the services. Problem is that when you have a monolithic application, when you have a monolithic services like this company, again, that has 400 services in a single DLL, just imagine when this company tries to update one of those services. It's a problem. Actually, that happened like 3 months ago. There is this developer that made a change, maybe a change in some logic. I can't remember, it doesn't matter. And this developer made that change, and he compiled the whole DLL with the 500 services, and he copied and pasted the DLL in the virtual directory in IIS. But sadly, that change was breaking some other things. He didn't know about that, so what he did was to stop the company like for 5 hours. Because in the meantime, they didn't know what was happening. Some calculations were misbehaving, some functionality didn't work, and the management didn't know about that change because there is no DevOps culture in the company. There is no continuous integration or continuous deployment pipeline. And just imagine the problem that happened when a company, a multi-million company, stops for 5 hours because one change in a DLL that has 500 services. Make sense? This is a real problem, guys. This is a real problem. That guy was fired, of course. He was fired like 3 days after that because of that error. Sadly, it wasn't his fault. Of course, he was his fault. But the problem is the culture without DevOps and without modern architectures that enable him to do that. So why I'm talking about this, because when you have that kind of monolith, when you have that kind of architecture that you can't update a single piece without changing everything, that's a monolith, that's a problem. So microservices is just the decoupling of that monolith in different parts. There is the customer's microservice, supplier's microservice, I don't know, maybe products microservice, inventory microservice. Make sense? So one of the traits about microservices is that a microservice should be independently versioned. And it must be high cohesive inside. This is that your microservice should have everything to work that is tied together with other things that make it work. This is, for example, customers and the customers type catalog, or products and the products type catalog. That kind of cohesion is important for microservices. In this particular example that I'm talking about, you don't want to have a products type microservices and a products microservices. You have to be cohesive in that particular matter. Other trait about microservices is that they must be independently deployed and versioned, as I just said, and scaled. This is that when you need more computing power for that particular microservice, you want to scale only that piece. You don't want to scale everything like the monolith in this company that I'm talking about. It's a real world example, and it's a true story about this company and its 30 megs DLL file. So with this traditional architecture that I was talking about, and actually I'm showing you with this Northwind Traders web forms application that I created for you, well, there is this problem that everything is tied together. It's just a monolith. So, of course, for that traditional architecture, there is a traditional workflow. In that traditional workflow, well, the developers build the application, create the application, code the application locally, and they are compiling the application locally, and when they are done, they put the compiled application in a virtual directory in IIS. In the other hand, the users, through a web browser maybe, they are using the application that the developers created and deployed. This is another problem because the developers, they have the seal of approval, the works on my machine seal of approval, right? Maybe you have experienced this in the past when you are coding your application and everything works fine. And when you deploy it in the server, nothing works. So this is the works on my machine seal of approval certification that most of us developers and architects are certified. So this is a problem that containers solve. Let me show you how. With Azure Service Fabric, that I'm going to talk about a little bit further down the slides, there is this basic Azure Service Fabric workflow that developer or group of developers must follow. There is no compile your application and push it in a virtual directory in IIS inside Azure Service Fabric. That doesn't work like that. Let me show you how this works. So for those of you who haven't seen Service Fabric, let me show you the canonical example of Service Fabric. What I'm going to do right now is to choose this template in Visual Studio, Service Fabric application. Of course, I previously installed Service Fabric SDK. And I'm going to put the name Update Conference Demo 1, like that. Azure Service Fabric has different programming models, and this is very powerful because maybe you have heard about Kubernetes, and that's another orchestrator. In Service Fabric, there are different programming models, and that's one of the main differences between Service Fabric and Kubernetes. In Kubernetes, you want to run containers, Docker containers. But in Service Fabric, you can create their own kind of services. The programming model is named Reliable Services. And in addition to reliable services, Service Fabric supports guest executables. This is any kind of exe file, any kind of application. You can deploy it to Service Fabric, and Service Fabric will run it in an escalated and high available way. I will talk more about Service Fabric right now. And the third model is containers. So reliable services, guest executables, and containers, 3 programming models. That's why it's so different, Service Fabric, if we compare it to Kubernetes. So in this example, I'm going to create this stateless ASP.NET Core. I will say that this is the service 1. As you can see in that dialog, I'm sorry, the past dialog, not this one, you can run .NET Framework services and applications. Also, you can run .NET Core services and applications. This is important as well, because the future about .NET is all about .NET Core. It's not about .NET Framework. That's why this modernization topics and the journey to the cloud and everything that I was saying in the past slides is important, because .NET Framework has no future. The future comes with .NET Core, sad but true, okay? This is not an official Microsoft announcement, but it's just like that, okay? .NET Core is coming, .NET Core 3 is coming, and it's super exciting right now because you could run in .NET Core 3 You will be able to run WPF and Windows Forms applications on top of .NET Core. So that was the only reason to use .NET Framework, at least in so many kind of projects. So anyways, this service, I'm going to just click on OK, and I'm going to show you that this is just a regular web API project. Here's the values controller. Nothing fancy here. I'm not going to type any more code right now because of time restrictions. What I'm going to do is allow Visual Studio to download the NuGet packages and to compile, because it's important to compile, right? Because if you don't do it, it won't run. OK, exactly. Rebuild, succeeded. Great. So this service is going to be published in an Azure Service Fabric application. Let me show you one very important thing here, an application manifest. This is the metadata for an application in Service Fabric. This is the place where you register all the services that compose that application. So it's just an XML file. Of course, this is a very easy example. The schema is very, very large, but we are not going to talk more about it. What I'm going to do is to publish this Service Fabric application that has just one service inside my local cluster. What do I mean with local cluster? When you install Service Fabric SDK, a cluster is created for you. Of course, it's emulating a cluster. Each node in the cluster is just one process in the computer, in the operating system. So I have my cluster installed. I'm going to publish this application in the cluster. And if everything goes well, I will be able to show you that service, that API running inside Service Fabric. And I'm going to show you and speak about Service Fabric, why it's important right here. In the meantime, so Service Fabric is a strategic technology from Microsoft. Why? Because almost 30% of their services in Azure run on top of Service Fabric. Service Fabric allows you to run processes, and those processes, Service Fabric ensures that they are high available. Azure Service Fabric allows that process to be replicated in the different nodes of the cluster where it's installed. So, because of that fact, Service Fabric is the preferred way inside Microsoft Azure to create those kind of applications that require high availability and scalability. Of course, with high availability and scalability, you will be able to have resilient software and better software at all. So one other trait about Service Fabric is that you can install Service Fabric in your own servers. It's not just a cloud product. It's not that you require Azure in order to use Service Fabric. That's why this is very important. Because, for example, if one of your customers or in your own company, they are like very suspicious about the cloud. That happens a lot, at least in Latin America and some other countries and regions. If the company needs to use their own data centers and its own hardware, It's a good idea to reuse those investments in hardware and servers and everything in that company. For example, the retail company I was talking about has its own data center with dozens of different servers. So we can install Service Fabric on premises. That's one of the key takeaways that I want you to go after this session. Of course, there is the Azure Service Fabric service, managed service inside Azure that you can use in order to create a real cluster if you don't have hardware in your company or in your projects. So let me go back here. The service was published. So what I'm going to do now is to show you that I have here this icon represents the Service Fabric management tool. And if I right-click that icon, I can select Manage Local Cluster. I'm sorry about that. So again, this is the icon. This one represents Azure Service Fabric management tool. And if I right-click on here and select Manage Local Cluster, I will be able to manage my local cluster that is inside this computer. As you can see, there are different applications that I registered previously. The one that I'm showing you right now is this one, Update Conference Demo 1. As you can see inside, there is the service that I created. And there are so many things happening right now. That unique identifier represents the instance of that service. This is because you can tell Service Fabric to auto-scale the application and create so many instances of that particular service if you need to, of that particular application if you need to. Automatically, the Service Fabric platform will be responsible to create those replicas for you. This is very important. So let me show you that this is running. Of course, it's running. Another thing that I want to show you is that my cluster has 5 nodes. So, of course, I'm emulating this cluster inside my computer. But this particular service is running on node 0, on the first node of the cluster. Okay, everything's fine. If I click on the URL that represents that service inside the cluster, I will be able to query that endpoint. Remember that is just a regular web API, nothing fancy here. So what happens when you have this cluster and one of the nodes fails? Let me rephrase the question for you. What happens when this kind of company that has only one server, what happens when that server goes down? The whole system goes down, right? That's the point of failure in this kind of architecture. This is not a good idea. When you have only one server, that's not a good idea, because if something happens to that server, you're over, okay? So what I'm going to show you right now, again, duplicate, okay, I'm here, is that I'm going to deactivate that particular node where the application is running. I'm emulating that the node is going down, that something happened. Maybe someone disconnected the server, or maybe a rock fell over the server, or something like that. I don't know. It doesn't matter. If I deactivate this node, Service Fabric is going to replicate that process in another node automatically. So you will be able to have resilient and high available software when you base your services on top of a platform that exactly does this. So when I disable the node, right now it's disabling. Please take a look here. Now the process was moved automatically to node number 4. This is the 5th node in the cluster automatically. And you will be able to continue querying. There is no loss. There is no loss in communication. This is what I mean with high availability, because automatically that process was moved to another node. This is very important, and this is fantastic. This is the base. This is the base for lots of different services inside Azure, like SQL database, like Azure DevOps, like Azure Event Grid, like Cosmos DB, like Cortana, Dynamics. So, as you can hear, it's very important in Microsoft, this technology, Service Fabric. So, how Service Fabric works. Given a cluster, let's say you have this 5 nodes cluster, what you do is install Service Fabric in those nodes in the cluster. Actually, you have to install it in just one node, and it will replicate itself in the other nodes automatically. Then you will be sure that the node, of course, are some networking things that you should be aware of. Of course, those nodes have to see each other. Even if that's a private cluster, each node has to see each other. So what you do in Azure Service Fabric architecture is to put a load balancer in front of the cluster. So you want your clients to touch the load balancer, not the nodes directly. What I'm doing here is to touch the node directly in this particular demo. But in a real-world architecture, what you are going to do is to put a load balancer, and the load balancer is going to see if that particular node is alive and healthy, and if it's not healthy and available, it's going to redirect the request to another node. That's what load balancers do, right? So, so you have your cluster, you have your nodes. What you do is to deploy your application, and Service Fabric is going to replicate the application in all the nodes. That's what we did here in this demo. And when a request comes from a client, let's say it's a web browser, maybe a mobile application, or maybe it's just a web application or WPF application, what have you, doesn't matter. When a request comes, the load balancer is going to route that request to a healthy node. This is a real-world kind of architecture using Service Fabric. How do you create Service Fabric clusters in Azure? Of course, you can use the Azure Resource Manager templates. What I want you to show you, what I want to show you right now is this template right here. Here's the Service Fabric cluster. Sorry. Again, something's wrong with my computer, because I don't know if it's extending or duplicating. Anyways. So I want you to see this template right here. So if you select this template, you will be able to create a Service Fabric cluster where you need to specify the kind of nodes you want, the operating system you want, the memory, the CPU, etc. about the cluster. And of course, Azure is going to create different virtual machines in order to create the cluster you specified. And it's a process that maybe lasts for, I don't know, maybe 15 minutes or 20 minutes. So I created one already. And the name is Update Conference 2018 something, something, something. Something happened. Let me reload this. I don't know what's going on with my mouse. I'm sorry. Okay, so update conference. And I have the, let me see. Right here, this one. As you can see, I created this Service Fabric cluster already in my subscription with 5 nodes. All the nodes are healthy right now. Here's the public URL where I can open a browser and open the Service Fabric Explorer that I just showed you. Let me open this. Go details, yes, yes, yes. Okay. And as you can see, well, I don't have applications right here because this is the real cluster in Azure Service Fabric, in Azure running. And if you need to publish your services there, you can do it right here with the publish option and then select this this option, the Cloud XML. And here, select your connection endpoint. Okay? So this is what it takes to publish this, this service right here. So let me change this to the last thing I want you to take away from this talk is this. If you have your legacy web services and web applications, what you want to do is containerize. That's the easiest part. So you create a Docker container with your services, and you publish those containers up to the cluster. But you don't do it directly. What you do in real world is to use a continuous integration and continuous deployment pipeline in order to upload your code changes, and in the cloud you want to create the image and push the image to the registry, for example, Docker Hub or Azure Container Registry. And then you will use that image in the deployment step to pull it and then push it to your Azure Service Fabric cluster. This is, you're not going to publish your services directly from Visual Studio. That's not real world. So a lot of things are I said here. The key takeaways that I want you to leave this talk after I'm finished is that Windows containers are the key for modernizing existing .NET Framework services. This is use Docker and Windows containers. The other key takeaway is Azure Service Fabric runs on-premises, and it allows you to run Windows containers. And Azure Service Fabric, if you use it, you gain a lot of functionality. For example, you gain auto-scaling and high availability automatically just by hosting your processes inside Service Fabric. So please don't use IIS anymore. That's the key takeaway. Please don't use IIS anymore and create a better world because of that. Okay. JQE. If you're interested, you can send me a tweet because there are lots of things to talk about Service Fabric. I just touched like 10% of Service Fabric. It's huge. Actually, it's so huge that maybe we need like 3 days or 4 days just to talk about Service Fabric. But it's an amazing technology, and it's an on-premises technology. So if you're interested to modernize your own applications, now you can do it. Just take your current code, containerize it, and put it in Service Fabric. So, thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of the conference.